Good afternoon, Senator Sampson.
Good afternoon, Madam President. I rise, like I did actually in 2021 on a similar bill, in determined opposition to the legislation before us. For the thousands of folks around the state of Connecticut that are watching this building today, this is not just another vote. It is a defining moment. Because what we're being asked to do here is not simply pass another bill. It is to see if we're going to take another step redefining the relationship between the citizens of Connecticut and their government. And we've seen this before. Back in 2021, this chamber debated and passed legislation that deeply impacted thousands of families across this state. Many of them were here inside this building and outside this building at that time. Many more were watching from home. And they were pleading with their elected representatives not only to be heard, but to be respected. And today, many of those same people are back. There's a lot of people in the building today, and there are many, many more people, thousands of people watching this legislature today. And they are back with similar concerns as before. And these are not abstract concerns. These are families trying to understand how they're going to educate their children, how they're going to keep their jobs, how they are going to live under laws like this, and whether their government still respects their right to make deeply personal decisions. In that bill in 2021, this body removed the religious exemption for vaccines for children. And I warned at that time that that would not be the end of the conversation. And today, my warning is being proven true. And it forces us to confront a serious question, which is our state government still made up of representatives of the people, or is it acting as a tyrannical authority over them? House Bill 5044, which we're debating right now, is not a new idea. It's the continuation of the same policy, the same philosophy, and the same massive expansion of government power. My concerns today are very similar to what they were back in 2021, only now they are bigger and more clear, and I would say spelled out very obviously in the language in the bill before us. And this is where it becomes dangerous, because history, and there are even present-day examples, show us exactly where this kind of centralized government authority will take us. Systems where governments track compliance, reward obedient behavior, and restrict access to everyday life based on whether citizens follow prescribed behavior. Where something as personal as a medical decision becomes a condition for participation in society. We should never move in that direction. I want to begin really by talking about what the bill does. So I think I'm going to ask a few questions of the proponent. So through you, Madam President, can I ask Senator Anwar, as chairman of the Public Health Committee, to kind of give us a breakdown of why the changes in the law are being proposed. And I want to just start with the notion that we are changing the standard of care from children to all residents of the state. Through you.
Thank you, Senator Anwar.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, I will repeat some of the things I had said in the beginning. Should I summarize well, I'll try to summarize, and I'll try to be short instead of the entire 20-minute conversation I had. But there are some federal changes that have been made, and the ACIP makeup has been changed. That is actually looking at changing the vaccine schedule. The state of Connecticut depends on getting the vaccines from CDC. So one component of the bill is to try and make sure that the state would have the option to purchase vaccines not only through CDC but beyond CDC, because if the vaccine schedule changes, the access to those vaccines gets limited. So that's one component of the bill. The other component is that if there is a recommendation that changes from the federal government, that would result in a risk that the insurance companies would not cover those vaccines. So part of the bill is looking at how to make sure that the insurance companies would cover the vaccine as well. This is not mandating any new vaccine. This is not giving the power to the commissioner to unilaterally add mandates on the school vaccine schedule. This actually bill is also not restricting any worker from their ability to work to get the vaccines before they would work. So those things are not in this bill, but the bill does have parts which are very relevant to making sure that the people who choose to have the vaccine can get the access to the vaccine. And the second part is about the RFRA that we have touched on earlier, which is it refines the boundaries of RFRA Act from 1993 so that the school vaccine laws and higher education vaccine laws are not impacted by the RFRA law. So that's a very short summary, Madam President. I can go deeper if there's a question through you.
Thank you, Senator Sampson.
Thank you very much, Madam President. I appreciate the good chairman and his answer, although I think it's interesting that it does not really reflect any of the conversation that's existed on this bill since the very beginning. The people that testified on the bill, the vast majority of them testifying in opposition, but even the people testifying in favor, I watched much of those hearings. I read a lot of the testimony. I don't remember anyone talking about the federal government restricting access to vaccines. And I would just note that I think Senator Summers very clearly stated that that's a bogus argument. That's not going to happen. And even if it was a true argument, it hasn't happened yet. And what this bill does is it takes the authority of this legislative body and effectively transfers it to one person who is going to be the person now who can ultimately decide what the vaccine schedule is, not just for children, but for all of us, for every Connecticut resident. And I know it's not lost on the chairman that that's a fine line, just a skip and a jump away from mandating behavior. Because once that standard of care exists, now it's going to be imposed. It's going to be imposed at all levels of healthcare, in the insurance industry, and on and on and on. Can I ask through you, Madam President, why we have put this responsibility for establishing the standard of care in the hands of one unelected person through you?
Thank you, Senator Anwar.
Thank you, Madam President. I want to thank my colleague for this question because it's a very important question. I want to first clarify that if there was going to be a mandate that would have to go through the legislative body, and if there is going to be a mandate that is going to be presented for the children's schedule, that would have to go through Regs Review Committee. But this is actually a standard of care question, and the standard of care also has given the guidelines, what guidelines the commissioner, whoever that may be, would have to follow. So while the commissioner is going to be responsible for using the guidelines to follow the recommendation for the standard of care, the standard of care is not a mandate, and if is not going to require anyone to follow if they choose not to. Through you, Madam President.
Thank you, Senator Sampson.
Thank you very much, Madam President. I appreciate the answer of the good chairman. But can I ask, are there any limitations on what the Department of Public Health Commissioner could add to the vaccine schedule, for example? Can they put anything they want on there through you?
Thank you, Senator Anwar.
Madam President, there are. These vaccines have to be the ones that have been approved by the FDA. They are the ones that have gone through all the appropriate tests, have been approved to be able to be used safely in that situation. So that would be one of the aspects to look at it. There is a part of the bill which looks at emergency component, and if that's part of the conversation, we can talk about that as well. Even in that particular part of the bill, there is no mandate and people do not have to follow the guidelines. Through you, Madam President.
Thank you, Senator Sampson.
Thank you very much, Madam President. I appreciate the good chairman saying repeatedly that there is no mandate, but I think he knows as well as I do that that's not required to be spelled out in the bill for it to become effective through other means. The establishment of the standard of care by the Commissioner of Public Health is going to be recognized by entities throughout this state. And then they're going to start to make their own requirements based on that established schedule. That is the danger here. That is why there are thousands of people that came to the Public Health Committee and opposed this bill. It's why I'm standing here right now. I know how this works. What I'm really looking for an answer is the Public Health Commissioner is a political appointee. This is a person who's not even elected. Not that I'm a big fan of putting elected people in the position of having power over decisions that affect us arbitrarily, but now what you're doing is you're taking someone who's not even elected, who's a political appointee, a political animal that obviously belongs to a political party and probably is being supported and placed in that position by the political party in power, and giving them the authority to make arbitrary decisions that the rest of us will have to live under. Where I come from is that the legislature, representatives of the people, vote on these things before they become law. So what I'm looking for really is some sense of what role the legislature can play as a check and balance against decisions that any future or current public health commissioner may make. What avenue do we have? If they decide to add something to the schedule that is aggressive or controversial as a standard, what recourse do citizens have? Through you.
Thank you, Senator Anwar.
Thank you, Madam President. I think that's a very fair question. I think we have seen, and I know my colleagues do not like to hear this, but we have seen that there's one unelected official at the federal level who just fired 17 ACIP members and appointed individuals who are not trained to be able to do the job by their own recognition. So we need to, at the state of Connecticut, be prepared as well to make sure that we have a legislative backup in that situation, and we do. So if there is going to be a mandate that is going to be decided by the commissioner for, as I mentioned, a new illness XYZ and has a viral infection of unknown capacity and there's a vaccine that is approved, the commissioner has the capacity to put that forward, but that would have to go through Regs Review Committee through the legislative branch of the government, where the Regs Review Committee members are equally distributed between Democrats and Republicans, and they would make that decision. So that would be a backstop to be able to make sure that there's a voice that is heard, and that process individuals would be able to, and everybody knows the members who are on that committee, to be able to work with them and educate them too. Through you, Madam President.
Thank you, Senator Sampson.
Thank you very much, Madam President. I appreciate the gentleman's answer. You know, the thing here for me is that it seems almost like an extension of what happened in the Public Health Committee earlier this year, which is the powers that be, the majority, decided that they want to advance a piece of legislation, and they put it out there, and the public overwhelmingly rejected it, opposed it, came in droves out here, sent voluminous number of emails, calls, office visits. I don't know how many people actually came to my office. I'm not even on the Public Health Committee, to tell me that they were upset about this. And yet, the public hearing didn't even go to its full conclusion. The majority didn't care much for listening to all of the people in Connecticut that wanted to have their voices heard. And for me, this is an extension of that. Because now what you're doing is you're taking a bureaucrat and you're putting them in charge of determining our fate and our future, and there's no check. There's no check. It's ironic to me that folks that talk about no kings all the time have a great tendency to create kings. Just in this circle in the last week, we have had bills that empower the comptroller to be the arbitrary, determining individual on whether or not they could stop payment on a job contracted with the state of Connecticut. And I made it very clear in my debate that they could do that for political purposes within the lines of the law. Yesterday, we had a bill, and in fact, I think the bill we did earlier today, numerous mentions of empowering the Attorney General to have the sole authority to intervene if the Attorney General felt something was wrong. In fact, depriving members of the public from having a cause of action in the same exact circumstances. What's going on here is that our government is switching from being a government of, for, and by the people to a government that pushes its weight and force upon the people. We're giving the Commissioner of the Public Health the ability to create this standard of care. And that standard can include schedules recommended by the Commissioner, has nothing to do with what's being adopted nationally. That's not a technical adjustment, that is a transfer of power. And then, of course, the bill is going to take that standard and it will be threaded all through our statutes in state government. And ultimately, it's going to affect access to schools and colleges, to child care. And now when you start adding adults, it's going to start interfering with people's access to jobs, to their own health care, to insurance coverage, maybe even access to society. Just look at what happened during the pandemic and you will get an idea of just the potential for what can happen. Where people are not allowed to go to the sports function unless they can prove they had a vaccine. Where you cannot even go to a Board of Ed meeting unless you can prove you're wearing a mask or you've taken a vaccine. Where people were not allowed on the second floor of their own legislature. The people's building. And this is the part that should get everyone an extra bit of pause, which is that once we hand over this level of power, it does not come back. It does not come back here for a vote. That schedule's in place. No debate, no accountability, no direct representation. Just one person, an unelected person, a political appointee. That is not how a free society is supposed to function. Back in 2021, we were debating this. There was a lot of discussion about how there was a crisis because there was a few random measles cases running around. So where's the emergency today? It's an easy answer, there isn't one. Where's the crisis that justifies this massive level of government expansion? There isn't one. In this bill, however, I notice in Section 8, let me just get it in front of me really quick. Section 8 is all about giving the governor of the state of Connecticut additional authority, not just to declare a public health emergency. And I will just suggest that if anyone was here watching these debates that happened in this chamber around the time of the COVID pandemic, you would have caught me in here raging against the machine about how the fact there is no actual public health emergency that you could put your finger on. We were declaring public health emergencies extension after extension after extension when there weren't even 100 people in the hospital in the whole state. It was madness. And it was quite obvious to anyone watching that there didn't have to be any actual public health emergency. All that has to happen is the governor says there is one, whether he believes it or not. That's enough. It's incidentally also the same criteria that determines whether we do emergency certified legislation is the leaders say it's an emergency. Doesn't mean there is one. What a terrible standard. What a lack of respect for the people of this great state that represent us, that send us to do their business. But I would just point anyone who's got the bill in front of them to lines 226 through 228. Included in the governor's expanded emergency powers in this bill is number 6, to authorize the Commissioner of Public Health or the commissioner's designee to issue a standing order to permit medical interventions, Lord knows what that might be, including vaccinations. Through you, Madam President, does this mean that if the governor arbitrarily declares a public health emergency, whether there is one or not, because all that's required is his opinion, that he can require every person in this state to get a vaccine? Through you.
Thank you, Senator Anwar.
Thank you, Madam President. I appreciate this question as well. This is a very important question. I will say that if you look at the last line of that, which clearly states that does not require any individual to receive or utilize such medical intervention. So there is no mandate even in a situation of an emergency. And it's an important aspect to clarify because even if the emergency, because the governor is the governor across the country, across every state, governors are the ones who in the state would declare emergency. So I think that's not necessarily a controversial issue, but if that declaration is made and a recommendation is made, the people will still have a choice to follow those recommendations at that time. It would not still be a mandate, which is probably something the other states are not even doing. And I wanted to also mention one more thing about the commissioner's role. The commissioner has been given the guidelines, and he or she, in this case at the present time, she cannot deviate from what the federal government is recommending, but also the 3 different groups that we have put in this as well. So she cannot just bring something out of nowhere into the standard of care. It has to follow the 3 different organizations and the federal, CDC and ACIP as well. That was from the previous question, but I've answered 2 things at the same time. So through you, Madam President.
Thank you, Senator Sampson.
Thank you very much, Madam President, and I appreciate the clarification, particularly with regard to the previous question. But when it comes to the governor and this section that we're referring to, he doesn't have to go through any of that. The governor says that he can authorize the commissioner to permit medical interventions, including vaccinations, necessary to respond to the public health emergency. It doesn't say anything about whether or not those vaccines have gone through any particular process or whether they've been approved by the FDA or anyone else. You're creating a mechanism here for more king-like behavior, frankly, by empowering a governor who already has the ability to declare a public health emergency willy-nilly. And they made a big deal about the fact that they were extending the public health emergency over and over after the COVID pandemic was largely over because they were trying to maintain access to federal funding. So people in the state can lose their rights because the governor decides that he wants to extend a public health emergency or create one out of thin air for some other purpose that has nothing to do with public health. I think it's dangerous. I also think that the caveat that was mentioned by the good chairman, while it does appear in the bill, I don't think that it is an all-inclusive caveat. And I don't know about the other people listening, but I lived through 2020 in Connecticut. I remember how difficult it was to just be a civilian, to go anywhere. Freaking arrows painted on the ground in Walmart telling you which direction to walk. You're going to tell me that they don't have the power to create mandates. They most certainly do. This bill isn't driven by any necessity. It's driven by ideology. I have great respect for the chairman of the Public Health Committee, but his very first words out of his mouth were Trump, RFK. That's what this is about. This is not about the health of the people of Connecticut. This is all about national politics and stirring it up, trying to create that division so that we're all Trumpers or anti-Trumpers and we got to get on or off the bandwagon. It's a bunch of nonsense. I come in here to do policy. I agree with the president sometimes, I disagree with the president sometimes, but I'm my own person. I make up my own mind, and when I look at policy like this, I shake my head because I see why it's here. It's just another in a long chain of politically motivated bills, because it is an election year, folks. You know, we had the ICE bill the other day. We'll be doing a gun control bill pretty soon. Oh, must be an election year. Is it good policy? Heck no. It's garbage policy. And it's so funny because I'm asking these questions about the extent of what the bill does, and most of the answers I get are, well, it doesn't do that. It doesn't do that either. So the bill doesn't do anything, so why are we doing the bill? The real issue here is not public health or vaccines. The debate's not about vaccines, it's about freedom. It's about religious freedom, it's about philosophical freedom, it's about plain old American freedom. The freedom to make decisions about your own life, your own family, your own body. And most of the people that are here watching us, and people that are watching at home, are really concerned because it's also about their right to make decisions for their own children. Before I go any further, I just want to say a quick word about the whole vaccine issue, really. My objection to this bill has nothing to do with my opinion about vaccines. Vaccines have saved countless lives throughout history. That's undeniable. I'm not going to say that I fully endorse the notion of vaccines, though, especially in recent years. I think the COVID vaccine was rushed through. It has been proven repeatedly now to have questionable veracity and the potential for serious damage to some individuals. What we're debating here is something fundamentally different, which is people's ability to make their own determinations themselves in light of the fact that there is a recognized, scientifically documented association between some vaccines, past and present, and certain medical conditions. And these new generation of vaccines, mRNA vaccines, for example, the COVID vaccine was developed rapidly, introduced under extraordinary circumstances, to say the least, and of course, accompanied by an insane amount of government force, effectively going beyond simply informing people about what their options are and coercing them into getting a medical treatment that they did not ask for. And I'll just say that for me, I didn't think much about vaccines my whole life. I was vaccinated as a kid, didn't really think about it. I'm 56 years old. I don't know how many vaccines I got. But I got to tell you, in 2021, when I started to learn that people are getting 70-something vaccines, I was starting to shake my head like, gee. And then I started to talk to people about the fact that their kids were harmed in some cases by getting numerous vaccines in a short period of time. Read a couple of books on the subject, particularly about autism. There's a lot of questions there. And even if vaccines were 99.9.9.999% completely safe, they are not 100% safe. And for anyone to say that you have to do something that is not 100% safe should not be allowed. But we saw all that coercion during the pandemic. People lost jobs. People were excluded from society. People were told that they could not participate in normal daily life kind of things. I wrote down a bunch of examples. I know folks that couldn't get their pediatrician to treat their child because they didn't have the full schedule of vaccines. I know teachers that lost their jobs because they wouldn't get the full array of booster vaccines for COVID. State employees were terminated for not getting the jab. People in the military. My concern about this is because when the government goes from simply informing people about your options to coercing them into compliance, once government crosses that line, it fundamentally changes the relationship that we have in this country between citizens and the state, which is what I opened up with. The bottom line also is that if vaccines are actually beneficial, you do not need to mandate them. You don't even need to go through the trouble of making some schedule and overtly encouraging their adoption by the citizens. Trust me when I tell you, they will run to go get them. It's like anything. If people truly believed that the vaccine was going to save them during the COVID pandemic, there would be a line out the door to get it. And in some cases, there were. You don't need to go out of your way to create a mandate. I want to confront something a little bit deeper in this debate, something that I have mentioned a number of times in recent days, and that is that we are seeing not just a policy debate. We are seeing an arrogance coming from the majority party in the state of Connecticut. An arrogance that says that because they were elected, they now have the authority to tell their neighbors how to live. And that's just not the concept of America. We are not elected to rule over people. We are elected to represent them. We are not here sent to manage people's lives and decide for them what is best for them. We are here sent by them to protect their rights. And when lawmakers pass laws that take away liberty, especially when we're talking about a deeply personal liberty like control over your own body, those lawmakers are no longer acting as if they are representatives. They're acting out of an extreme level of arrogance that should concern every person in the state. Back in 2021, when I debated this bill, I did a lot of research. The similar bill, frankly. Not this bill, but the similar bill about the repeal of the religious exemption for children. And what I found was really interesting, that in 1959, polio was the big concern. And the legislature met repeatedly to determine exactly how they would react to that. But I was reading through the transcripts, and the one thing that stood out to me was that the conversation among all of the lawmakers was about how certain they were that they had to, above everything else, maintain the religious liberty and autonomy of their constituents. They were afraid. They were actually afraid to pass any kind of legislation that might even hint at running afoul of the personal liberty and the rights of the people they represent. How different it is today, where some folks cannot get here fast enough to tell other people how to live their lives. This is not an isolated issue. It's a pattern. On one side, on my side, we believe that people should be able to make their own choices. They should be able to chart their own course. They should choose the best path for themselves. On the other side, it's all about control. Control over employee arrangements, control over housing decisions, control over business, the amount of bills that come through this place regulating all of those things for the benefit of the people. You're denying people freedom every time you put your own stamp of what's best for them, so they can no longer decide for themselves. And now we're talking about control over what people can and cannot put into their own bodies. I reject this philosophy out of hand. It is not our role. And I believe that once the government crosses the line, once it claims authority over your body, there is no meaningful limit of freedom left anymore. One thing I said in 2021 that I remembered after looking back at my notes from that was that I said at the time that even if they came up with a vaccine for immortality, still up to me whether I want to take it. That's what freedom means. Not a commissioner that issues directives, but individuals making their own choices. This bill expands power beyond today, because it's really about what's going to come next. Because once the commissioner defines this standard, and that standard automatically flows into the rest of our laws, then future decisions are going to happen. And many of them are going to happen without this legislature, without any debate, without any votes, without accountability to the people. And that's how power expands in our government. Quietly, incrementally, and sometimes permanently. And we can take this one step further. By limiting the ability to challenge these policies under religious protections, we are not just expanding power, we are weakening the ability for citizens to defend themselves against that power. And rights that cannot be defended are no longer rights at all. Madam President, I would guess that there are thousands of people that are paying attention to what happens in this chamber today and this vote on this bill. Most of them are opposed to this legislation. If I had to put a number on it, I'd say 90+%. They are not extremists. They're not unreasonable people. They are parents. They're families. And they're citizens, free citizens of our great state, the Constitution state. And they are angry that this is happening despite their objections. And I think it's also fair to say that a number of them are afraid. Not because of vaccines, but because they see their government gaining more and more control over their lives than it should ever have. And they're asking a simple question, which is, are we still free in Connecticut? I believe in large measure that really depends on what this body does on this vote and the rest of this legislative session as we decide more and more whether the government is going to have more and more say over the individual decisions that people make. If the majority continues to expand government authority into deeply personal decisions and pass what I consider to be a disgusting and disgraceful bill like this one, if they continue to act like they know better than the people they represent, they are not preserving freedom. They are eroding it piece by piece, bill by bill. And this is one of those bills. I'll just end with a quote that I wrote down. We were not elected to control our neighbors. We were elected to protect them from government just like this. Thank you, Madam President. So I am back just to say a couple of quick words. I think that the thesis of my commentary earlier was really about the decision that we're going to make today, that we often make in this chamber, which is about how we want our government to operate. Do we want our government to be dictating what our lives look like and what decisions we're allowed to make as free citizens? Or are we going to be free people, who make our own choices, decide our own fate? That's really the bottom line. So earlier, when we were sitting around in the minority caucus room discussing what kind of amendments we might run, I chose one that I thought kind of boiled it down to a very simple choice of what policy we should have when it comes to vaccinations in Connecticut. There's the policy that the majority has been working on incrementally, considering what happened in 2021 with the removal of the religious exemption for children, and today with this expansion in the standard of care, which I believe will ultimately lead to a mandate on even adults in the state. And my view, which is that free people in the state of Connecticut should be able to make up their own mind, period. And there are states that have different types of policies on this. Some states have religious exemptions, some have philosophical exemptions. In fact, I think that Connecticut is one of only 4 states that actually doesn't offer a religious exemption. So what we have in Connecticut is an unbelievable level of control from our state government on the ability of individuals to exercise their religious freedom in medical decisions. For me, I don't think you even should have to declare a reason. I don't think you should have to declare that it's part of your religion or your philosophy of life. just simply that you're a free citizen, damn it. And it's my choice what goes into my body. So with that, Madam President, I have an amendment. It is LCO 4630. I ask that the clerk call this amendment, and I be given leave of the chamber to summarize.
The question is on adoption. Will you remark?
Hold on.
Oh, sorry.
LCO number 4630, Senate Amendment F.
The question is on adoption. Will you remark?
Thank you very much, Madam President. I will remark. I will move adoption. I will ask for a roll call vote. And I will just simply state that this amendment very simply would replace everything that's in our current statute regarding the requirements for a citizen to deny the mandate requirement of a vaccine by simply stating that it is contrary to his or her personal beliefs. And that would apply to adults, to children, to everyone. So this is a very simple amendment, folks. It's either you want the government to decide how you live, how your family lives, whether your child gets a vaccine or not, or you do. It's a freedom amendment, for lack of a better term. We're going to live free, or the government's going to tell you what to do. A yes vote is for freedom. I encourage my colleagues to vote yes.
If all the members have voted, the machines will be locked. Will the clerk please announce the tally?
Senate Amendment F of House Bill 5044. Total number voting 32, total voting yea 11, total voting nay 21. Absent not voting 4.
The machine will be locked. Mr. Clerk, would you give me the tally, please?
House Bill 5044. Total number voting 34, total voting yea 22, total voting nay 12, absent not voting 2.
Legislation passes.